Welcome to Ideas at Work, a podcast featuring conversations with scientists, academics, writers, and thinkers who are influencing our time. The world has changed. Those ideas we once believed to be true will now be viewed through an entirely different lens post-COVID-19. What I'm interested in discussing is the emergence of this new normal, what changes, what stays the same, and what slips into the annals of history. Also, my viewpoint is anchored in two things. One, in organizations. What's the role of the company in these new and turbulent times? And secondly, what are the main ideas we need to consider or reconsider? I won't be talking to interesting people per se, people with interesting viewpoints who have done interesting things, but rather diving into conversations with people who I think are propagating the most important ideas that inform our current situation. Today, I'll be chatting with Andrew Mcafee. Andrew is a principal research scientist at MIT. He's the co-founder and co-director of the MIT Initiative on the Digital Economy at the Sloan School of Management. He studies how digital technologies are changing the world, and he is known for his work in describing the impact of technology on businesses, work, and the broader culture. He's the author of Race Against the Machine, How the Digital Revolution is Accelerating Innovation, Driving Productivity, and Irreversibly Transforming Employment and the Economy, co-authored with Eric Bryn-Olufsen.
And you know what? I could not have said that entire subtitle correctly. I'm gonna admit that. I feel very comfortable with that. If you woke me out of a sound sleep and said, "What's the subtitle of Race Against the Machine?" I would have come close. I wouldn't have nailed it.
Okay. Well, there's more to come here. Also co-authored with Bryn-Olufsen are The Second Machine Age: Work, Progress, and Prosperity in a Time of Brilliant Technologies.
That one I would have got.
And Machine Platform Crowd: Harnessing Our Digital Future. Just speculating, and maybe when you co-author with someone, you actually need, more words in the title and subtitle.
That could be it.
And last, but certainly not least, Andrew published More from Less: The Surprising Story of How We Learn to Prosper Using Fewer Resources and What Happens Next. You should know.
I think there's like subtitle creep as a danger in books these days.
Absolutely good. You should know Andrew's ideas are often counterintuitive. We should embrace technology even as we admit that it might make many jobs, including ours, redundant. And maybe the most controversial, we should embrace capitalism in order to make the environment better. Despite this hyperbolic introduction, these arguments made by Mcafee are always grounded in data and presented not as a potential Davos tech utopia, but as a potential path, a path that could, with the right balance of wisdom and humility, point us to a progressive future where we could build a better tomorrow for the earth and everything on it.
Amen.
I suspect that after COVID-19, there'll be a great sorting, a dividing line, a BC and AD, if you will, and thus some ideas and some organizations will wither and others will prosper. As organizational people, we need to ask ourselves why. Are there any ideas that can make sense of the machines, work, and the engine of our economic growth, organizations, societies, and the environment and all of humanity? Well, we have no better guide than Andrew Mcafee. Andy, welcome to Ideas at Work.
Toby, thanks for having me, and I'm sorry that I crashed your introduction.
No, it was getting tortured and too long, and not because of your
the subtitles alone would have made it tortured and too long.
So listen, do you agree? Are we looking at a epoch-defining event, COVID-19, or is this just a blip?
No, I'm with you. It's going to move us into a new chapter in business history. We don't know exactly what that chapter is going to look like. Anybody who talks to you with ironclad certainty is kidding you or kidding themselves or both. But the world is going to be a different place once we finally beat this organism.
Right. And before I go any further down that path, how are you doing personally in this whole turmoil?
Oh, thank you for asking. I'm doing about as well as could be expected. I am sheltering in place with my mom, which is awesome because I have a companion to do jigsaw puzzles with here. And we are on an island, a leafy island off the coast of Massachusetts. Spring is finally here. If you have to go through this is about as good a way as you could think of to do it.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And before this, would you have spent a lot of time with your mom, or is this also a special time that you guys get to spend together?
This is really special. We're very close. She lives in the same city I do. But if you had told me that 2020 was going to be characterized by me spending what's it been, like 2.5 months now and counting in close quarters with my mom, with me hopping on 0 flights, I would have laughed in your face. Or I would have said, "Oh my God, she's going to be that gravely ill. This is going to be terrible." Neither of those things is true, and it's not terrible at all. So, you and I don't want to work too hard to find silver linings. This is a dark period that we're going through, but the chance to not be off to the airport all the time and to be in one place and to actually spend time with, my mother, this is all right. I'm going to look back on this with fondness in that particular way.
Yeah, cool. You just touched on something that maybe you want to riff off there. I spent more than my fair share of time on an airplane. I'm sure you did too. Like, was that an inefficient use of time? And were we just like cargo culting what everybody else was doing, or or you think that'll come back?
It'll absolutely come back.
Yeah.
You and I have not hopped on our last planes. And the reason I don't think it was a totally inefficient use of our time is just this fundamental fact: we humans are a weirdly, deeply social species.
Right.
And even though what we're doing now is amazing and it's much higher bandwidth communication than we could have had even 5 or 10 years ago, still, there ain't no substitute for being face to face. And, you put on events. I speak at a lot of different kinds of events. Again, once we beat this pathogen and we can talk to each other without fear of giving each other a potentially fatal disease, we are going to want to talk to each other again. I don't know about as much or in all the modalities or for all the reasons that we do right now, but planes are not a thing of the past at all.
Yeah. Do you want to speculate on any of those modalities? Like, you would get on a plane but you would do this, like this thing that we're doing now, instead of. Do you have any speculation on?
I want to hear what you think about this, because you've lived a largely remote life for a lot of your career, and you're trying to help run a pretty big organization that's figuring out. Can I tell you a couple things, and then I want you to react to them?
Yeah.
I don't think this, as powerful as it is a tool by which a deep bond is going to get formed between people. Right. The reason I'm super happy to talk to you and super comfortable doing this is you and I actually spent time face to face together. I have initiated friendships on Twitter and things like that. I come across somebody who I think is really smart. Yeah. I like their style. I think they have a sense of humor. We joke with each other. You can do all that over Twitter. I would never have suspected that, but you can do all that. It is not the same as having a meal with the person, as having a couple drinks together. It's absolutely not the same as reaffirming and refreshing your bond by hanging out with your friends. I've had these fantastic virtual, dinner parties and cocktail parties and whatnot. The key word there is virtual. And I don't think that even with these amazing technology hacks that we have figured out how to trick our wiring into thinking that we have a bond with another human being when we have never been in the same place at the same time as them. Does that play?
I think it really plays. Like, I think the new way will be, you will anchor human relationships in sort of physical, tactile, visceral.
Yeah.
And then there'll be sort of that will cement the relationship. And then upkeep can be done like this.
Yeah, exactly. And you're going to want to go back and reaffirm that relationship with these touch points, I think. Now, that implies a bunch of weird things. Does Shopify, does a company need as much very expensive central city full-time real estate as it has right now if this world is anything like what you and I just described? Man, that's a whole lot of headquarters space kind of sitting empty a lot. And you saw the announcement from Twitter and a bunch of other companies that, permanent work from home is an option that exists now.
What is it? May 21st. Ours was announced several hours ago. Same thing.
Oh, is that right?
I think Facebook right after us, Twitter, as you mentioned. So, yeah, I mean, tech companies are a little bit different because for a longer time, we can build, support, and sell the software from anywhere.
Yeah.
But
a lot of us would not have predicted. I think a lot of my colleagues in academia and business academia would not have predicted that you could coordinate really interdependent knowledge work with 100% remote work.
Yeah.
And I think you guys are homing in on the conclusion that pretty close to 100% virtually, you can run a software development team, which is an incredibly complicated team to run.
Yeah, I think our bias is still just what you said, though. The bias is still in person. There's so much more you gain from in person. the way I've managed my team, so I've got about 3,000 people on my team, and they're 95% of them are remote. And
95
yeah, yeah, and have been for a long time. Now,
have been for a long time.
yeah, so I, one of the things I think you need to be very deliberate about is actually team structure. Because the first thing you learn about working from home, and I don't know if you've got this yet, is it's super alienating, right? So and so much about team is just the serendipity of running into a small group of people where you have conversations with.
Yep.
And when that's gone, that makes it really difficult. So
can you build that in with technology? What do you do?
You can. So just think of a lot of teams will have a team jump off every day, and they can be unscripted. So half an hour where you're just like chewing the fat, essentially.
Oh, yep.
And then a team wind down at the end of the day, or at the end of every couple of days, or the end of the week,
and you do it via Slack or Zoom or some combination of those kinds of technologies.
Exactly, Google Hangouts or Zoom. And at the end of the week, you may want to have a drink, right? And so that's where people actually, it's water cooler time.
And when you say drink, you mean people are actually sitting around with a drink and their respective whatevers?
Exactly.
Isn't that fascinating? Yeah. And a lot of people would have thought that was either ludicrous of you to propose 15, 20 years ago, or some kind of horrid dystopian vision of the future of knowledge work. How pathetic is it that we have to sit there in our separate places with a drink? If that was all we got to do, I would agree that's kind of dystopian and sad, but you're helping educate me. That's not the whole story.
It's not the whole story. I mean, the bigger part is this cementing the actual human relationship.
Right.
So the whole philosophy I'm calling hub and spoke. So the spoke is where we all live, and the hubs are those times, maybe offices, as you say, but also those times where we come together, we congregate for brief moments of intensity.
Right.
So, so I run these things called summits where I go around the world with my team. And so we were supposed to do one next week in Ireland, and they're great. And people come together and think big tent sort of, super. Again, ostensibly there's lots of learning going on, and there's lots of talks, but the real meat of the whole affair is breaking bread, having coffee, having beer, like the chit chat, right? That's where frankly, that's where truth gets spoken to power, cornered in the bar by two people who are saying, like, I don't know if you know this, but what's really going wrong here is, and so it's, so I think that will continue. I think that unfortunately can't happen right now because we can't fly or congregate.
Right.
But that will be the first thing that'll come back.
And people will be thirsty for it.
Yeah.
And if you ignore that, I think you've learned this over your career. If you ignore that, you're just missing something really, really fundamental. And I would take it one step farther. Have you read The Secret of Our Success?
No.
Oh man. This is one of the most mind-blowing books. He's a guy named Joe, I think Henrik is his last name. If I butcher that, I apologize. And I believe he's an anthropologist by training, but he wrote this fantastic book that first of all makes the case that we humans are categorically different than anything else on the planet because of the intensity and the weirdness of our socialization, and the fact that we create culture over time, and that culture adds up in a way that no other animal that we've witnessed ever experiences. Naked mole rats are super social. They don't build compound bows, right? They don't figure out these kinds of technologies. That's unique to us. Yeah. And when you go around and you look at every human group, including the ones who still live like foragers and hunter-gatherers, and you notice that they do what you just said. They get together periodically. The bands come together and they throw I think the technical term is shindig.
Oh
yeah. They throw they throw a wing dinger, and they get communal that way, and that's how the bonds get formed that persist, even though the bands kind of go back to their own territory. And more to the point, they are almost always characterized by periodic rituals where there is a long-term singing and dancing going on in music. That appears to be really, really deeply wired into us. And I'm being 100% straight with you. I now understand Burning Man a lot better than I did before I read the book, because that, like for the tech crowd in Silicon Valley, that is what they go do. And it appears to be kind of deep in our wiring that we want to go do that. We want to go do that in communion with other people, and bonds get formed that way that are incredibly important for practical purposes.
Absolutely. I this was precisely the conversation I was having with David Sloan Wilson,
Sweet.
the father of multi-level selection.
Oh,
Talking,
such a powerful concept.
Yeah, and I think Jonathan Haidt, maybe even quoting David Sloan Wilson, suggests he's got this beautiful little metaphor. We are Homo sapiens 90% chimp and 10% bee. Just in how pro-social we are and hide it, right? So I was just looking for the name of the book. William McNeill, who was the author of Plagues and Peoples.
Yeah, okay.
Wrote a book on human movement, and it came out of his experience as when he was drafted for the Second World War, of actually marching. And so,
great.
Just the humans in unison, humans in communion.
Yep.
Humans in dance.
With the beat going on in the background, man, that is way down deep inside us. Tony Hsieh talks about going to his first rave, and he said, "Look, I was, like a lot of techies, he was kind of a tightly wound dude. You couldn't imagine going to parties and dancing." And he goes, "Oh, I get it. Everybody is facing in the same direction. Like, we're not trying to dance with. I'm not trying to, find a woman to go dance with her. We're all facing the same way in communion with this DJ who's leading the whole thing. That's actually where the power comes from."
Yeah. And I just want to be clear, Andy, communal ecstasy is not what we have at the Shopify meetup. I just want to be.
Well, I think as long as we don't say, ecstasy in the sense of the name of the drug, I hope some people achieve that state of feeling.
A sense of bliss.
Yes. There we go. I got it.
Yeah. Okay. So we think offices may take.
Yeah, I don't think either of us are advocating the drug-fueled corporate all-nighter. Like, we should be very clear about that.
Yeah, that's good. My corporate betters will appreciate that amendment. Thank you. So we think the office may change, may morph into a different type of place. We think this hub and spoke thing may be a way of the future. What you're big on the future of work. Like, this is kind of. What other things do you see coming down the pipe in terms of how work changes?
I think there are two things that are pretty clearly going to happen. And these were both already underway, led by, I think, really geeky companies, usually in high-tech industries that were facing nasty competition. So the clock speed of innovation was a lot higher. Right. William Gibson said the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. Yeah. So we can go look at where the clock speed is highest to see where this is farthest along. Yeah. COVID-19 is going to bring a lot of the rest of the economy closer to that frontier, I think, in two main ways. We're doing a very, very intense and sincere experiment right now in what kinds of work can be done remotely with the same level of quality and fidelity. That's the hub and spoke that we were just talking about. And what can we automate? Right. Because one thing we know, even with a vanilla recession, and a recession not caused by a pathogen that makes it a really bad idea to be close to another human being, even leaving that aside, one thing we know from previous recessions is that they focus companies on their bottom line. They focus companies on their cost structure, and companies use recessions as opportunities to reduce costs, clean house, figure out what can be automated, and employment does not bounce back as quickly as revenue does. The pattern is just incredibly clear from previous recessions. Mm-hmm. COVID-19 is going to do that bigger, deeper, in large part because the technology toolkit is just leaps and bounds better than it was before the last recession, which kicked in, what was it, late 2007? Right. I mean, think what's happened since then. Right. We've had the cloud has happened, machine learning has happened, all kinds of automation has happened. So, are these delivery drones with 6 little wheels going around suburban sidewalks? Is that a blip or is that a trend? Yeah. I vote trend. Right. Yeah, absolutely.
When you investigate this stuff, you talk about the clock speed. So a couple of observations. One is just working in a high growth tech company. You get used to that rate of exponential growth. Yeah. And one of the things I noticed was, politicians and journalists would make this mistake, which is, hey, it's not too bad in New York now. How bad could it be? Like, totally misunderstanding what exponential growth is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so do you notice that in your observations that this, when you study high clock speed organizations, they have a different perception of how things work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's going on is that the company is getting an upgrade. Right. In the same way that, like we were talking about earlier, humans communally invent technologies. Those technologies improve over time. You can look at the bow and arrow, for example,
Yeah.
and they improve in a way that no one member of that community could describe.
Mhm.
Very often, we don't know which elements of that improved technology are essential and which ones are superfluous.
Right.
And it takes you got to reverse engineer these things to figure out what's actually going on.
Mm.
Lots of different cultures around the world have figured out these extremely elaborate food purification techniques,
Right.
because it turns out if you just eat a lot of corn, you'll get a really bad disease. If you eat a lot of the food that people make their diets out of around the world without going through some 12-step process of adding ash to it and purifying it and letting it sit long enough, you'll get sick and die.
Right.
People figured this out before we had modern biology and food science.
Right.
So I think one thing that's going on now is that we are iterating rapidly toward a what I think is a categorically better way to run a company in a lot of very fundamental ways, but we haven't done the reverse engineering of it yet. In other words, we had the steam engine before we had thermodynamics. I think you and your peers are inventing a better way to get mechanical energy out of fossil fuels, a better steam engine.
Right.
One of the things that I want to do is go back and help reverse engineer and say, okay, what are the thermodynamics underlying this better thing that you all are doing?
Right. And to further a conversation that you and I are having about flights, which is, yeah, we're still going to fly, but now we'll fly for X, but not Y.
X, but not Y.
Because we know why. The physics of Y says why we can do this, but X actually is much better served by being there in person.
That's right. And we're going to get a theory about what X versus Y is, and we're going to stress test it, and it'll get better over time. For example, I don't think there will be as many people hopping on as many planes to do as many touch base meetings, even with really important clients,
Right.
because this period is going to socialize everybody to expect that you can get some kinds of pretty intense work done, some very different flavors of meeting done without hopping on a plane.
Right.
Now, let's say that you screw up a big software delivery to a major customer. You might still have to hop on the plane because nothing's like an apology in person. But I absolutely accept that. I mean, a lot of these things that we hop on planes for, we're just going to stop doing.
It's interesting that you use that, because in a former life, I've been that guy hopping on a plane.
I bet you have.
And so much of it is penitent, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And it's funny. It was a musician I liked who gave this chat. And he's like, "Hey, man, I think this is probably a typical trope, but he's like, I play for free, man. What you're paying for is like the travel,
yep, and
the setup of my gear, and me not sleeping in my own bed, right?
Yeah, yeah.
There's a penance in that, and as soon as we realize that's ridiculous, like that's an ineffective cost we do not want to pay, right?
Yep.
And we only will pay it when it's actually effective. Do you have any speculation, like
maybe an apology needs to be, in many cases, needs to be a costly signal in the way that a game theorist talks about it.
Exactly.
Right? So you can't, I'm not going to let you phone this one in.
Yep.
If you want to show me that you're actually sorry, you need to incur some costs on yourself. You got to get out of your bed. You got to go hop on a plane. You got to go do that for the sake of this relationship. I wouldn't be surprised if that flavor of business travel stuck around.
Okay.
I think bonding is another deliberately costly thing that people do with each other.
Yeah.
But like you just said, man, are there team check-in meetings where people are driving or flying in ways that they don't need to do? Can you do a lot of consultative activities? Can you weigh in? Can you troubleshoot? Can you do very detailed work via these tools? Yeah, you can.
Yeah, cool. I have this imagined continuum that you could plot with sort of trust on one end and information on the other.
Yeah.
The closer you are to trust, the more probably in person and visceral and palpable it'll have to be. And the closer you are to information, the more like, literary it could be. This is it. So when I say it's my idea, stolen completely by Marshall McLuhan in his, his Hot and Cold.
Yep.
But what you can do when we start talking about building the physics of this is plot on it every communication media, from in person to this video chat. Like this is pretty palpable, right? It's real time and synchronous, and I can see when you're laughing and when you're bored.
Yep.
and then plot everything down from like, real-time synchronous chat to asynchronous email down to, a tweet that
Yep.
is really circumscribed and has only a certain amount of characters and is public, right? And then my suspicion is if you were to score it for trust points, you would score very low on this side of the continuum and very high. And
Yep.
so to get up there, you'd have to have so many Slack messages. Like what we're doing now is probably worth like 700 Slack messages.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because as you know, we are the only mammals, the only primates where you can see the whites of the eyes.
Yeah.
There's a reason for that. I'm incredibly attuned to where your gaze is.
Yeah.
I read you, you read my body language in ways that we can't even articulate. We do it all the time. We're both receiving and sending signals to each other, even over this weird little narrow channel right now.
Yeah.
And that is, as you just pointed out, that is a huge upgrade in bandwidth over sending even a large number of Slack messages back and forth.
Yeah, exactly. Cool.
And as bandwidth improves and latency goes down, I won't have to guess as much exactly where you're looking, or we won't have to have that weird however many millisecond delay that can really gum up the works.
Sure. And who knows, like maybe a holograph will be the next thing. But, like we don't even know how important smell is. It's completely subconscious or unconscious to us, and it might be incredibly important.
And we know it's incredibly important. I think, isn't your olfactory center very close to like the most ancient part of your brain? We know these things are important, right?
Yeah, we know that women make mate choices off scent and all kinds of things. You know what I mean? So
yeah. Now I'm not anticipating that the next unicorn is going to be the scent add-on to my home computing setup, right? That's not what I'm saying. But we're at the early stages of innovating on exactly this category of technology to let you interact with other people without having to be face to face with them.
Right. I mean, one of the things too, though, we are still transporting information. So, one of the things I've noticed is there's an intimacy to the new work because you've invited people into your home.
Yeah.
Right. And so, like, I'm like, oh, you've got books there, and I've got a stone wall, or you know what I mean? You're like,
yeah. And of course, you get anxious about it, right? So now I'm here on my island house, which is not where my big fancy bookcase is, and I'm like, I got to build that big fancy bookcase. If I'm an alleged smart person, I got to have a bunch of books behind me. There are all these wise ass Twitter accounts that rate the bookshelves of the people that now appear on talk shows and cable news.
I've always been that guy. So we would hire people remotely. You've got a copy of Friedrich Nietzsche back there.
Exactly.
Like rate the book snob sort of guy.
I always play how many books can I recognize even if I can't read the cover. Just the cover color scheme tells me enough.
Yeah. I can't help but think of one of the things you and I talked about a little while ago was this was when we were talking about more from less. So this amazing idea that technology and capitalism and a few other horsemen can save us, even the environment. So we can go there a little bit, but maybe to get into there is these news reports that COVID-19 has been fantastic for the environment. There has been a reemergence, dolphins in wherever dolphins aren't supposed to be.
Have you seen all the boar going through Barcelona and Berlin and places like that?
Exactly. Yeah. Like antelope in Shibuya or something,
Yeah.
Like that. But you told me this thing, and I can't remember who told you, but I'm sure you will. Which is nature bats last.
Nature bats last. Stuart Brand does not take credit for that phrase, but I heard it from him, and I walk around with that all the time. And my lesson from that is if we can avoid exterminating species, it's really hard to bring them back from absolute extinction. Sure. Stuart Brand and George Church and some other people are working on that. Maybe you and I will see a passenger pigeon before we die. I would probably take an even money bet on that, and I would be in favor of de-extincting that species. But leave that sci-fi out, man. If we can avoid obliterating other species and we get out of their way, we leave their habitat, we leave their ecosystem.
Right.
It is weird. It is wild how resilient nature is and how quickly nature will come back and just say, it's good to be here again. And we will repopulate and regreen the earth as we reduce our physical human footprint on it. I firmly believe that. Now,
Right.
that's not as good as not screwing it up in the first place.
Right.
But it's too late to undo a lot of those mistakes. I think our homework should be to intensify our activities. And by that, I mean reduce the footprint that we need to get all of our stuff done.
Yeah.
Give the rest back to nature.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So maybe tell us a little bit more, those of us that haven't heard it, this counterintuitive thesis that by having more technology and, in fact, more capitalism, good things can be done to the earth.
Yeah, and this made me new categories of friend and enemy when I wrote More from Less, and when I tried to make this point as clearly as I could, because the language of the first generation environmental movement that was born just about 50 years ago, I put Earth Day, April of 1970, as the dawn of the modern environmental movement. That was a deeply anti-capitalist, anti-industrial movement. When you go back and read some of the founding texts of Earth Day, they're saying, look, we are screwing the planet up. There are too many of us. We are too materialistic. We are taking too much from the earth. We have this system of industrial capitalism that we have built up that is despoiling the planet. We have to turn away from this. And one thing happened that's not surprising, and one thing happened that I find really surprising. The unsurprising thing is we did not turn away from that, right? I think you had kind of a hippie upbringing, but your family was kind of in the minority. A lot of people dipped their toe in that lifestyle and said, this is really hard and really uncomfortable, and I'm going to go back into civilization. The back to the land movement was never a big deal.
And to be fair, my parents only went back to the land for my formative years, Andy. That's why I'm scarred. Then they became yuppies, just like everybody else.
Just like everybody else, right? But I bet you're super glad for those weird hippie on the land years.
Yeah, I mean, I think people should be glad for any unorthodox background they have. It makes you just a more interesting person.
Yeah.
But so
the thing that industrial capitalism has continued since 1970. And in fact, many more people, a much higher percentage of the world's population lives under capitalist economic systems than was the case in 1970. Russia, the Soviet Union dissolved. China became, this weird hybrid but largely capitalist country. Brazil and India came out of their socialist insular periods. The world now has one dominant economic system. And so I wasn't expecting the wall to fall and all that to happen, but I didn't, I'm not surprised that capitalism didn't go away.
Right.
To me, the really surprising thing, and the reason I decided to write More from Less, was when you look at the data about the most ardently capitalistic countries the world has ever seen, and I'll put my country at the top of that list, the United States. The crazy thing that has happened since 1970 is that our footprint, the total American footprint on the planet, plateaued and is now going down in most of the ways that you would care about. And I mean a few different things. I mean the raw tonnage of resources that we need to satisfy all the desires for consumption for all the Americans put together. And you've spent a lot of time in my country. We haven't turned into a nation of Buddhist monks, right? Marie Kondo has not taken over the entire economy. Americans still like stuff.
Despite Canadian self-satisfaction, we're not Buddhist monks either.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So you and us and the Brits and these other, the countries that invented the first and second waves of the industrial revolution, we have not turned our backs on higher GDP, higher standards of living, more consumption, all of that. The deeply weird thing is that the total tonnage of molecules and resources that we need to satisfy that consumption is now going down over time.
Right.
And the first thing people say when they hear that is, okay, maybe I don't believe you. Even if those statistics turn out to be true, it's because we outsourced all the dirty stuff to China. And to be honest, we have outsourced some stuff to China. It turns out that really doesn't explain the whole phenomenon very well at all. And so
that's included in your data too. You were very thorough with that. Yeah.
And I've been fighting on Twitter with people who say, oh, you're not accounting for globalization properly. I just don't think it's a very deep argument at all. The data point in the other direction. And the weird thing is, how could this have happened? How could the relentless engine of capitalism have gone from taking more and more from the earth year after year, which it was clearly doing, to plateauing and then taking less? And my two-part explanation, Toby, as you well know, is first of all that capitalism is also, if you have enough competition, it's an intense quest to spend less money, to keep your costs low, and molecules cost money. And when this toolkit, this digital toolkit comes along that lets you not buy a camcorder and a tape recorder and an answering machine and a film camera and film and a DVD, and you have it with this. This is a really small device, man. This is a world champion of getting more from less. Another example that I put in the book is that aluminum cans weigh either somewhere between 20 and 25% of what they did when they were first introduced. Beverage companies know you and I do not value the aluminum. We want that tasty beverage inside. And so all their engineers have figured out ways to keep the beverage safe while using less and less aluminum over time. These savings add up. And so the 1-2 punch of intense competition and the profit motive, combined with this huge and ever expanding digital toolkit that lets you save costs and swap out stuff and use bits instead of atoms and move bits instead of atoms, you put those two forces together, and they are what's finally allowing humanity to tread more lightly on the planet. I think it's just this. I find it a wonderful story, and I still believe it.
Yeah, and well, and to defend more from less even more, you're not a Davos techno enthusiast Pollyanna. Like
as long as you add Pollyanna to the end of that, then it's a true sentence.
Yeah. So because there are governmental things, there are civic things that you suggest we do, like, for example, global warming. You're not denying that's not a real thing.
Yes, I am. I'm a huge denialist. Please, I'm sorry. I can't even joke about that. I try to say many, many times in the book, look, it's here, it's real, it's bad, it's going to get worse, it's us, and we can fix it. Yes, absolutely. But I try to say very, very clearly that there are problems that capitalism and technology will not fix on their own. That this relentless engine will not fix. And in fact, they cause some of these problems. If you let businesses pollute without cost, businesses will pollute. Pollution is just the externality that you learn about in your Econ 101 class. If you let ecosystems and animals be part of the inputs to production, somebody's going to use them. We hunted the whales all over the world, so many species to extinction, not in the 19th century. We did enough of that. Things got worse in the 20th century when we had factory ships with rocket-propelled, grenade-tipped harpoons, these amazing, terrible industrial technologies. We used helicopters to go spot where the pods of whales were and then killed them in the 20th century. We didn't need their blubber for fuel anymore. We made margarine and lubricants out of them.
No, we can do better.
Come on, man. Like, this is a moral crime. We eventually got together and said, okay, no mas, no more killing the whales. But we needed, as you say, we needed people to demand that the whales not be killed anymore. And we needed government action to put in place restrictions with teeth. And to make that not an okay thing to do in the pursuit of capitalist profit. Great. Put those restrictions on all over the place. Protect species, protect ecosystems, make pollution either flat out illegal or so expensive that companies find it cheaper to not pollute. And then we've got the recipe for taking better care of the earth without sacrificing our flourishing and our prosperity.
Yeah, right. Do you have any speculation on why these arguments have become so binary and so difficult? Like, because I think you walk this really useful middle path, right?
I think that it is hard to let go of a worldview.
Right.
I would have trouble letting go of the worldview that I just espoused, even if somebody put very, very good data in front of me. Now, I tell myself that I haven't seen that data that's so awesome it would overturn what I believe. But, you and I and everybody else hold on to our beliefs and our worldviews, especially when they get to our moral core. And Jonathan Haidt is a guy that you and I both respect a great deal. This is one of the things he taught me, is that, human beings have moral foundations. They are not all the same. And the closer a belief is to your moral foundation, the more tenaciously you're going to hold on to it. So all that is going on. The other thing is that as these debates get polarized, it really feels to me like people enjoy shouting at each other more than, and dunking on each other with social media, more than trying to say, look, I know you like the planet. Would you give me enough credit to believe that I like the planet? Let's figure out where we disagree and why, and can we come to some kind of path forward?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. It does seem like, to Haidt's point, that these are tribal passions held almost religiously.
Religiously, right? And the way you signal that your membership in that tribe is by believing this thing over here, even if it's a thing that is not really well supported by the evidence, right? Anti-vaxxers are not going to finally read the research paper that changes their mind. They're not going to do that. And it's not because they're stupid, I believe. It's because they're in a community where that's kind of a signal of your tribal affiliation.
Yeah. And the more outraged you are, the broader and more powerful the signal is to that community.
And the more faithful that signal is. And if you're willing to go to bat and yell at people, it's a way to get prestige in a strange way inside this community. It's one of the things that really makes me nervous about our current time. I think you and I have talked enough. You know, I'm pretty optimistic in ways that some other people aren't. This polarization, this tribalization that we are living in, and that appears to be deepening in a lot of ways, this is actually scary to me. This is actually scary. When your tribe depends on whether or not you believe that you should be taking whatever the name of the drug is, prophylactically to fed off COVID-19,
right,
with no evidence to support that. But all of a sudden you're going to line up behind this set of beliefs over here, as opposed to what the evidence and what the science tell you. Man, this is not good.
No.
When wearing a mask becomes a thing that you're willing to fight about during a pandemic, this is not good.
No, it's not good. So you're prolific on social media, Twitter especially, right?
It's my platform of choice.
Yeah, it is. And as a thinker and a writer, I totally get it. I've opted not to go there because I find it too. I find I'm too triggered to use the parlance. Like, honestly, I like the combat. I really enjoy it. Like, I think like a good conversation can be had by two people who really disagree, who can be civil to one another. But it's the format I just find poisonous. So how have you found, especially the last 2 months, have you found a liking of that, or?
No, I'm with you. It's a forum usually for people to dunk on each other and to demonstrate their greater command of the facts or their greater facility with the English language, or this great insult that they came up with. And then I retweet the great insult that I saw. So I'm part of the whole vortex of nasty that's going on. Yeah. The only reason I still hang out there, I mean, ego and whatever else, but I follow people who, instead of just doing bare knuckle fighting and trying to troll other people, they put up fantastic content on a regular basis. And a lot of them, when they interact with their critics, they do it in in an adult way, in a way that's not about trolling somebody or dunking on them or showing how great your insult game is, where they're trying to say, this is why I believe this. You can go read the paper. I'm sorry you don't feel this way. When you watch adults on Twitter, I actually kind of find it inspirational. So I try to curate who I follow a bit carefully. And man, the instant you start descending into the replies and watching the flame war break out, then your mood is trashed and you've wasted how much time. I think one of the ways that I try to keep getting value out of Twitter, don't read the replies.
That's what I've heard. Yeah.
For me, it's true.
Yeah. No, I'd be moved to violence. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's how we are as humans, right? It's just really difficult. Okay. So you've got like an emerging idea that may coalesce into a book.
Yeah. It's feeling like that.
So do you want to talk to us about that?
It goes back to what we were talking about earlier. I think the company is getting an upgrade, and I say that for a few reasons. Like we talked about, the future is not evenly distributed. I think there's a relatively small and growing set of organizations that are showing us some fundamental things about running this entity called a company better.
Right.
And okay, why should you care about running a company better? I think you should care deeply about that. Whether or not you're a shareholder, you should care deeply about it, because in our capitalist economies, companies are where we get most of our stuff, most of our goods and services. I would like those to be better instead of worse. And most of us are employed by, some kind of company kind of a thing. Most of us are not government employees.
Right.
And so if you're going to be spending on the order of 40 hours a week, or, for white collar workers, and today it's more than that, man, that's a big chunk of your life. I think it would be better if that were not in an environment that squelched you, that made you feel like a cog in some kind of machine, that didn't listen to you, and that didn't make you feel like you were walking into a Dilbert cartoon or an episode of The Office, right? So for those two reasons, I think running companies better is kind of a profoundly important thing to do. And when I look at how well Ray Dalio's book did about principles, and man, the company that he's built, Bridgewater, is one of the strangest places that I have ever heard of. It's deeply, deeply weird, but there's something going on there. One of the hot business books coming out later this year will be Reed Hastings' book about Netflix's corporate culture. He and I think his team put out a 120 odd slide PowerPoint deck that
It's sort of a manifesto of.
Yeah, the manifesto. And Sheryl Sandberg, I think she called it the most important document ever to come out of Silicon Valley, right? And for those of us who write books, that's kind of, a bummer to hear. But what she's trying to say is these guys are figuring something out. When I've walked around Amazon and talked to that, should I not even say that word here as I talk?
You're good. We're super collaborative with everybody.
But that company actually has a set of principles, and I haven't spent enough time talking to your colleagues at Shopify to get your culture into my brain as deeply. I will tell you, Amazon's principles are a thing that company lives and breathes. This is not the 90s corporate mission statement that all reads the same and that nobody looks at twice. These companies are actually operating by a different set of principles. And what the homework that I want to take on is to articulate what those are and the commonalities. And then the fun part for me is to explain why these things exist, to reverse engineer. Why is this thing the way it is? Can it be improved? Can you graft some of this onto what you're doing? Is it for everybody? I think these are kind of important questions, and I want to dive in on them.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. I didn't know that's where you were going, but I'm super interested in this project. I think this is really needed. Because we have our own culture. We're a culture-led company. We have our own. I think we really do live them. I think, so one of those values is thrive on change, and just
amen.
Yeah, right. And just today, and of course, thrive on change is one of those things that it's a platitude and easy to say, bloody hard to live.
It's bloody hard to live.
Yeah.
But what's interesting? If you go back and look at those 90s era corporate mission statements, they did not say that.
Right.
That was not a thing that they said. And I think that shift is really, really interesting. I think what you're trying to get people to do is not have their status quo bias become cement in the company, and not try to hold on so dearly to where they are today, where they sit in the organization, what kind of turf they've carved out, because I think that is one of the things that actually kills companies.
Yeah. No. Well, and
even if the world is not changing quickly, if an ossified bureaucracy is a thing that you are part of and striving for, and you're going to get crushed by some competition, and your people are going to be a little bit miserable. So those are two fairly bad things.
Now that you say this, I'm going to have to be an ossified bureaucracy off our list of culture.
Really, is that one of your part of your 12 principles? But I just found that I've just been going deep cuts on this because I'm in the early stages of the fun part of the book is before you actually have to write the damn thing, and you just get to jot down notes and feel smart and go read, find weird documents and read them. I finally found the English translation of this long article that ran in a Finnish newspaper's Saturday insert, where some guy tracked down a lot of the senior people at Nokia and asked them what went wrong. Because you remember how on top of the world Nokia was up to and after the launch of the iPhone. And I think you and I have witnessed very few corporate falls from grace that were that fast, by a company that was regarded very well. It was a very well-run company. So this Finnish journalist went around, found a bunch of senior Nokia people, and just asked them, what the hell happened? And the story that they tell is a story of a bureaucracy getting bigger and more ossified as you watch it. And if you're the kind of nerd that you and I are, it's it's gripping reading. It's a page turner.
So here's where I'll play the devil's advocate. I don't know if it was Macmillan, the Prime Minister of I may get there, a prime minister in the last 75 years in Great Britain, when asked by a junior reporter what would happen to unseat his prime ministerhood, and he said, "Events, my dear boy, events." And so, no matter how well managed you are, there are some good companies who fall. So it's not always internal dynamics, and that's
absolutely true. And thank you. That's a really important caveat. There will be some extremely well managed companies that don't survive COVID, unfortunately.
Yeah. And that's like the least likely thing for me to say, because I think so much of it are the internal dynamics that you're about to investigate.
Yeah.
And I think, the scrutiny that I would want you to give, and folks like you, is not just the cargo culting or the kabuki theater, right? It's really what I would call the physics of an organization,
yeah.
right? Like which cultural values actually map to appropriate action, and which of those actions actually matter versus the ones that don't.
Exactly. And why do you and your peers that I think are, again, you're upgrading the company, you're reinventing this for, I'll call it the second machine age, because that's the title of the book that I co-wrote. You're reinventing the company to thrive in this new environment. Man, what are you guys doing in common? And to the extent you're doing things different, I think there'll be a lot more commonalities than differences. For the things that are different, man, what's interesting there? Why aren't you believing all the same things?
Yep. So here's just a thought for you to noodle. There's probably two really important sort of currencies in an organization.
Yep.
Maybe three. I'm totally making this up as I go, sort of. One metabolic currency would be like cash, like money. Yeah. Companies got to either have a lot of investment or they got to make a lot of money. The second one is information. Like, information has to descend to all the various democratic particles as quickly as possible. And we know how to account for cash, and we know pretty well, Claude Shannon et al., how to account for information. I think the third one is underreported, and we don't know how to account for it, which is trust.
Yeah.
And I think it might be the most important thing. This goes back to our singing and dancing comment, yep. Which is what you're really doing is building commonality and a foundation of trust with your fellow employees. I'd be fascinated if you have any insights of looking there, or any thoughts.
Yeah, I don't right here, right now, because this is early days. That trust and where it comes from and how it's maintained is hugely important. Like, it's very, very delicate. Yeah. And what causes it to get wiped out, or how do you lose it over time? I think that's really interesting. Another thing that we don't talk nearly as much as nearly enough about is, in addition to trust, is prestige in organizations. And the reason I say that is because, again, I'm going to go back to who we are as a species. We are so unbelievably deeply wired to assess other people for their fitness as an ally. And can I trust this person? I'm much more likely to ally with high prestige people. I want to be like them. I want them to notice me. I want to form bands with them. They're the successful coalition leaders and coalition builders. And to assume that away, or to think that we're going to be more rational about this, that is a category mistake. It's a super deep mistake, and we make it all the time.
We're evolved to cooperate with people who we think will ensure that we're successful, like that,
and who we think the trust means there's some reciprocity there. This person's going to look after me in rough times. This is somebody I want to be like, and that reason that's important is if I want to be like them, you probably want to be like them too. They're going to be an effective builder of a coalition where we're all going to take good care of each other. If you lose those dynamics, if you ignore them, then you're just letting coalitions and factions and ever thickening bureaucracy take over your organization. No, realize that, harvest it, and as you guys keep trying to say, thrive on change. Don't entrench yourself. Amazon, they're zealots about simplifying things. Cut through the underbrush that's going to get built up otherwise. So I think you can map some of these fairly deep things about us to fairly smart principles for running an organization without too much translation in between.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Right now, do you have like a through line, like in terms of yes, all of this will be looked through the lens of, evolutionary theory or communication theory, or
I'm trying to go back to first principles, which is a really highfalutin thing to say, but I think it's important homework to do. And the alpha geek Elon Musk always talks about first principles. I think the first principles that are going to come in very, very handy here are some of the things that we've been talking about. I think evolutionary psychology is just incredibly important. Understanding who we are, what actually drives us, because the fact that we sit here in 2020 and we have space age technologies and we work in industrial age corporations, man, this is a thin veneer on who we actually are. And really kind of believing that and working with that, if you believe that's a fact, working with that, I think will get you a long, long way. It is astonishing to me when I read business books. I read business books a lot. I read leadership books. Man, that fact is almost not acknowledged.
Yeah.
Now, we've gotten close to it because, Danny Kahneman wrote his book. Richard Thaler won the Nobel Prize. These glitches in our mental hardware are entering the mainstream. I think what needs to enter the mainstream is, man, we're still living on the savannah.
Yeah.
And ignoring that is a great way to screw things up.
I'm a huge believer that there's tons of gold to be found in evolutionary psychology.
Right on. And combined with another very fundamental first principles discipline, which is game theory.
Yeah.
And if you put those two things together, I think you start to understand a lot. And the ambition that I have, this project that I'm embarking on that I'm super excited about, is some kind of effort to bring these two things together. And crazy smart people have already done that, right? Steven Pinker has done this kind of stuff. Robert Trivers, who's just this weird intellect, has been working at this space. Some of my colleagues at MIT do really good work here. So this intersection is a really fruitful one. And then if there's a third leg on the tripod, I just switched my metaphor. If there's a third leg on the tripod, I think it's computer science and artificial intelligence, because we have this colleague now that is not us.
Right.
That came from a very different place, that can do astonishingly valuable, subtle, interesting work in the way that we used to need a human mind to do, but it is not a human mind.
Mm-hmm.
And if we combine what we are authentically good at and the way we're wired with the way that thing is wired, man, that's a fantastic 1-2 punch. If we get it wrong, then we make all kinds of terrible mistakes.
And just to put a point on how difficult that is, as you say, we don't really have a good idea of how we're wired, especially from an organizational and a business sense. There's not a comprehensive philosophy. One that I would encourage you to go down is this idea of multi-level selection, which is contentious in the business world, but it could bear so much fruit because it talks about where we're collaborative and why, and where we're competitive and why. And in fact, that in essence is what a company is. We're competitive in some phases and we're collaborative in others.
And you can get the kind of internal competition that you don't want. And I would call that a deeply entrenched, ossified bureaucracy, where the point is not to improve the process or get better goods and services out the door. It's to protect what you have right now, to protect your turf against all invaders. That's a very natural human thing to have happen. I think what you and your smart peers are doing with your principles and with your organization design is trying hard not to let that happen.
Yeah. One of the paths we're going down, I don't know if it'll bear any fruit, is adopting some of the practices of Eleanor Ostrom. I don't know if you know her.
Oh, yeah. And manage the commons.
Yeah, right. The tragedy of the commons. So this idea of can we collaboratively share resources? And of course, there's sometimes where you need hierarchy and you need authority, right? Because in her case, there's always communal or consensual authority. And my belief is that's not a great way to run an organization. I'm not into holacracy.
Yeah, I did not think that Shopify was the largest holacracy on the planet. I'm not surprised to hear you say that it's not. Right.
And it could work in certain forms, but again, what multi-level selection tells us is sometimes it's good to be competitive, and sometimes it's good to have strong leadership, and sometimes it's good to be communal and collaborative. And it really depends on the context.
Yep.
Right? And
to nail the if-then statements,
right.
It would be a wonderful piece of work to do.
Yeah. And just to know that those dualities exist, because I think the biggest problem, this goes back to what we were talking about, capitalism versus environmentalism, it shouldn't be versus one versus the other. It should be, in what context does this heuristic actually make sense?
Right. And to say that you have to choose between a cooperative view of human nature and a competitive view of human nature is to misunderstand human nature. You're behind the eight ball right there. You're not going to get it right.
Exactly.
But you have to, once you realize that we are this intensely social, hierarchically wired species, and we form ever larger tribes and bands and supergroups and things like that. And then at the interfaces of those things, how do you have that be a productive interface versus when do you go to war? And if you want more productive, how do you get that? Oh man, that's fun stuff to think about.
Another interesting angle that you may want to go down, if you're comparing these, the sort of mottos and the sort of, the things you write on the wall, it's similar to like a country's constitution.
Absolutely.
And there's some great work done at the Santa Fe Institute by, I think, a guy called Dan Rockmore. I may have this wrong, but just about how constitutions evolve and how they track the evolution of constitutions.
Really? I'll check that out. I didn't know that.
I'll try to find it and send it to you.
Great.
That would be interesting. Can you compare like the credo of Netflix versus the credo of Amazon, and does it actually show up in their actions?
Yeah.
And to your point about the bow and arrow earlier, these things are often shared back and forth. Just so,
That's right.
We're like,
That's
hey,
right.
Like Shopify wants to live for 100. Like one of our conceits is we want to be a 100-year company.
Great.
Right. And that's kind of I haven't heard anyone else say that anywhere else, but it's actually a super powerful conceit because it makes you focus on the long term.
Great.
In ways that most organizations don't.
And if you focus on the long term, you're going to spend more time getting your constitution right. You're going to try to write documents that you then live by that will be healthy instead of unhealthy.
And maybe other people will pick up the things that work, like thrive on change or live for 100 years, and you'll see that propagate throughout the business community.
In the same way that lots of different human societies came up with the compound bow. It's just a better way to go shoot a projectile a long way. So independently, they came up with that, and the similarities are generally more interesting than the differences.
Right. Huh. Cool. Good. So what do you think? What do you think the biggest change will be? Like culturally, economically, organizationally after COVID-19?
One of the things I think is that we are wired to come together during times of crisis.
Yeah.
There's a really interesting theory that the greatest generation that came of age after World War II, the reason they were the greatest generation is because they had this searing event during their childhood. The nation had to come together. They were formed during that time, and then they went on to do all these great things as a nation.
Yeah.
So this terrible pandemic that we're living through could be a thing that brings us closer together.
Yeah.
If you are of the bad fortune to be living in a country with a petty authoritarian leader who is using this as an opportunity to sow division at every opportunity, that coming together is less likely. I look around the world at these countries that just crushed the virus, right? Like New Zealand just dealt with it. Australia dealt with it. South Korea, these countries have dealt with it. I think those countries are likely to see a surge of communal feeling and a go Kiwis attitude that I'm likely to be very, very jealous of.
I got to say, I'm usually sort of anti-Canadian just because it's so easy to be pro. But I must say, we've got essentially a conservative premier in Ontario and a liberal prime minister,
Yep.
and they're playing from the exact same song.
Are they really?
Yeah.
What's it like? Can you just describe it? Make me feel good for a minute.
It's called Sanity. It really is. You still get people chirping on the extremes, but
yeah.
But by and large, it's really disheartening. I mean, the other thing I would say about community and coming together and the greatest generation is, what about the just inherent nature of a pandemic that is demands you be quarantined, so that you can't build sandbags together or go to there must be something there that makes it more difficult to come together.
I think that's right. And it could be weird and more difficult to come together if the very fact of coming together is more likely to get you or a loved one killed, right? That's weird. That's a weird flavor of crisis for us to go through together. I still think our nature is that external threats bind groups together, even if the threat is spread by aerosolizing, air when you're near somebody else. And I think that this quarantine period is reminding us of, man, just how good it is to go to a restaurant and have dinner and have a couple drinks or just go get coffee. And oh my God, can you imagine a dinner party with some friends you haven't seen in a while? I mean, doesn't that just sound like nirvana, man?
It does. Yeah, it does. I hope we come out of it with that sense of grace and thankfulness.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm an introvert, but I'm a little bit of a huggy person. I like to put the body on people. I think you and I, if we didn't hug on the way in, we hugged on the way out when we met. And I I miss hugging people.
Oh yeah.
I miss putting the body on them and saying, it's good to see you. I think that's going. God, I hope that's going to come back. I was at a conference once where my co-author Eric Brynjolfsson was interviewing Danny Kahneman, and that's just like, shut up, take notes, don't check your phone. This is like Springsteen playing at the Stone Pony. This is an unplugged set. Just listen. Yeah. And Kahneman was Kahneman, right? He's just gentle and wise. And at the end, Eric said, Danny, you've been doing some happiness research. What's the conclusion from that research? And of course, he had a bunch of them, but he had this great story. He said, when I was a kid in Israel, we got air conditioning for the very first time. It was a technology that appeared. And the first day as a little Israeli walking into an air-conditioned room, the happiest you've ever been, right? Like the skies it was amazing. Yeah. And he said, the 10th time I walked into an air-conditioned room, it was better than sweating outside. Did it make me happy? He goes, no, that's not a feeling I associate with air conditioning anymore. Right. And I'm in the audience going, he's talking about the hedonic treadmill that we're all on. And it's just kind of this painful fact about being alive that you're never satisfied. And I'm like, Danny Kahneman is bumming me out. And then he said to Eric, Eric, think about your weekly poker game. Yeah. He said, your weekly poker game can have gone on for 30 years. And on the Friday night of the 31st year, you are going to be as excited as you were during year one. You're going to look forward to having your friends come over. You're going to talk smack. Hopefully, you're going to win some money. But you're going to get together and you're going to have a chosen voluntary social event with people who mean something to you. Yeah. And Kahneman's point was, man, that does not get old. Yeah. And I remember sitting there in the audience, and I think I even stopped taking notes because it hit me so hard. I'm like, that is absolutely true. I think a lot of us busy people don't make time, don't do enough of that. Yeah. And, if you smell the roses is this really lightweight kind of nonsense piece of advice. If you will actually plan more of whatever your version of the Friday night poker game is, that will be a better way to go. And so we're going to go back to whatever our poker games are after COVID is over.
And was the specificity of it was smell the social roses specifically, right?
It was social. Yeah. It was I think what Kahneman was trying to say, if I had to abstract it, maybe not even voluntary, but social things that you get to do with people who mean something to you. Right. And to me, that's categorically different than go to a cocktail party. I don't enjoy those. I'm too much of an introvert for that. Right. But once I actually get to know a few people, and maybe I don't want to be with them 5 nights a week, but every first Monday, do I want to count on that? Yeah, hell yeah.
You see, Andy, I like cocktails enough that I can put up with you.
Great. Whereas I drink alone, which is probably not a great sign.
There's something in that, just talking about your more for less philosophy too, which is, and we didn't really touch on this, but this is a big part of the evidence, which is for the last 200 years, wow, people used to die really young all the time, God. And now people live forever. But we kind of take that for granted. Like people in the emerging world, they're now living longer. Like everybody's life's getting so much better, but still we complain, right? Like that's the fun. So there's this relative versus absolute problem that we have as well. Right?
That's absolutely right. And I think part of what's going on there, again, I'm going to turn into this really amateur evolutionary psychologist. If we got satisfied kind of easily, maybe we wouldn't have advanced and built great civilizations. I think this yearning, this striving is pretty deep in our nature, and this lack of just complete bliss. Okay, maybe that's what let us make Machu Picchu, right? Right. Okay, that's not too hard a story for me to believe. Yeah. But if you ever want to knock yourself out of that, go to a part of the world where there are actual still poor people, and look at what real poverty looks like. And if you are not a great deal more thankful for your life and the things that it has afforded you, I think you really do have some problems.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
And then I think our homework is not to just feel bad and not renounce our prosperity. Let's go make all those people rich too. One of the things one of the viewpoints that probably frustrates me the most is a zero-sum view of the world.
Yeah.
Whereas if humanity gets better off, it must be because we degraded the earth. I do not believe that. If you and I get more prosperous in North America, we must be pillaging Europe or Asia, Asia or Africa. That is not true. And so to get out of this zero-sum thinking, which is kind of first-order logical, we got a fixed pie. No, we don't. The pie gets bigger. Let's make the pie bigger as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I mean, you're speaking to the choir here. Shopify is an entrepreneurship innovation company, right? We think we can create more entrepreneurs.
Right.
Like, what's your total?
And you guys are doing super cool things to go create more entrepreneurs.
Right, that's the trick, right? And
yeah.
They in turn innovate and create more products.
That's right.
The fixed pie fallacy might be the worst mental problem you can encounter still in the 21st century.
Yep, and it's still incredibly pervasive. And people usually won't talk about it in those terms because they know that they'll get accused correctly of making a mental error. But I can hear that viewpoint lurking in the background pretty easily. Exactly. And so I'm super excited. I read your recent announcements about how you're making it easier to go be an entrepreneur, go spin something up. Yeah. I look at really fascinating companies like Stripe that is just doing deep work to increase the amount of innovation and new stuff out there. Matt Ridley has a book that just came out. I think it's called Why Innovation Happens. It's on my Kindle. I can't wait to read it. And we have to embrace and spread this philosophy that what we need is not some allocator of prosperity or an innovation bureaucracy. Yeah. Of course, we need guardrails on things for some reasons, but we don't need this to be a top-down, centrally directed thing. We need lots and lots of shots on goal. I'm going to use a hockey metaphor here. We need them to come from all kinds of different places, and we need to give as many chances for prosperity and flourishing as we can possibly come up with.
Yeah, and the thing I would add is you can do that in a society with lots of safety guardrails as well.
Yeah. Those are not incompatible, right? The thing that the business community said, at least in the first wave of environmentalism, that was self-serving and just dead flat wrong, was really nicely summarized during a debate on the Clean Air Act. A small town mayor said, if you want this town to grow, it has to stink. Yeah. No, it doesn't. Yeah. No, we don't have to accept that.
Yeah.
Right. So like Toby, to your point, let's put the guardrails on, but let's be sure why the guardrails are there. Health, safety, environment, a safety net. Absolutely, a social contract. Yeah, put those guardrails in place. Right. I look at Canada is a very, very successful company in this way in my brain. The Northern European countries are very successful in this way. We say in America, we don't want to wind up like Denmark, man.
Have you been to Copenhagen?
Denmark has higher rates of entrepreneurship and business dynamism in a lot of ways than America does. Denmark, I believe, has more billionaires per capita than America does. Wait. Walk me through the problem with that approach to things again.
Yeah, and again, goes back to this duality and this binary thinking and sort of this. Yeah.
And this jingoism and tribalism, man. We gotta do better.
We got to do better. So I have a bunch of questions that people have sent me. So let's.
Cool.
Some of them you will have covered. So let me see if I can find one. Here's a good one. You have spoken about the impact of robotics on society in your TED Talk. What's your view on the upside and the downside of AI? Secondly, what's your view on whether it's already a genie out of the bottle? What can be done to mitigate or harness it?
I think the last thing we want to do is too much upfront mitigating or harnessing. Okay. When it comes to these really powerful new technologies that appear, that are not clearly a nuclear bomb. And what I mean by that is a nuclear bomb is a thing that is designed to go blow up a city. That's what it's there for. Okay, we probably want to put some global infrastructure and try to stop that technology from proliferating. I get that. AI is not a nuclear bomb. That is not the right analogy at all. It's a hammer, right? Do we want a massive centralized global hammer bureaucracy that decides who gets one, what the acceptable uses are? Do you have to apply to use your hammer? No, to me that's AI. And I realize that people are going to use AI. They already are. They're going to use it for nefarious purposes, and they're going to inadvertently use it and train it incorrectly so it doesn't recognize faces of African descent.
Right.
Yep, that's happening right now. We haven't seen the last of it. Garbage in, garbage out still applies. I get all that. These are real problems. We have bias problems. We have to increase interpretability. The way to do that is, again, lots of shots on goal. And I'll go back to something an American Supreme Court justice said. He said, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Great.
Yeah.
Let's have a vigorous free press and a blogosphere and a Twitter sphere that highlights these things and shows how bad the training is on AI. Great. Do all that. But I'm of the school of thought that's the kind of the Jimmy Wales Wikipedia school of thought that says make it easy to correct mistakes, not impossible to make them.
Right.
So I'm much more of the permissionless innovation school of thought than the upstream governance school of thought. My example for this is again, it's your smartphone, which has a really powerful camera on it. And sure enough, some losers out there decided to use this form factor to take upskirt photos on subways in New York, for example. Like, who? Okay, great. Let's make that very illegal very quickly, which is what cities all and states all over the world have done. You cannot use the camera for that anymore. The wrong thing to do was say smartphones can't have cameras anymore. And the wrong thing to do would be you must submit this to some body that's going to investigate all possible use cases and weigh in on whether or not the camera is an okay thing to have. I don't buy that approach.
I'm with you there. What about people who say, "Oh, that's not a fair analogy"? What's more closely analogous is the actual H-bomb with the famous paperclip maximizer. So that AI is so inscrutable, we don't really know what works. We are so failed as sort of logicians that we may program it so that it takes over the world. Just you're not buying it.
No. This really strikes me as the product of somebody who read a whole lot of sci-fi and had a whole lot of late-night dorm room BS sessions when they were an undergraduate and has not moved on from that. It's of the school of thought that's kind of like, can God build a rock so big she can't lift it?
Right.
Aha, I got you there. There's a logical inconsistency. I don't find those very compelling. Is it theoretically possible? I guess. Lots of these logic puzzly things are. I don't find them very interesting.
You think like a systems control override that would be elementary enough that it would say,
I'll start to worry about that when we see any indication that this is a thing that happens, right?
Yep.
And then the super intelligence community says, well, it'll be too late then because it'll be improving so quickly that it'll override your overrides, foolish mortal. Yeah, okay, fine. Go back, go read some more sci-fi. Toby, the reason I believe this really strongly is because I've had the privilege to talk to a lot of the people who build these systems for a living. And Andrew Ng has told me and many other people worrying about that scenario and killer robots and the paperclip maker that takes over the world. He said it's like worrying about overpopulation on Mars. In other words, I guess it's a thing that could happen.
Right.
Is it proximate? Is it a thing that we need to, given the actual problems that we have? And good God, to fight this virus, do you want a lot of AI or not?
Right.
Do you want to be putting the brakes on AI at a time when we've got to unpack what this thing is doing and come up with treatments and vaccines? You want really good tools or not really good tools for that? I asked Peter Norvig, who's just one of the legends of AI and machine learning. I was in a hallway had a great hallway conversation where a bunch of people from the superintelligence community were kind of laying out their viewpoint. And I saw Peter and I said, hey, do you buy this? And he goes, look, it's absolutely theoretically possible. And there's no reason it can't happen. He said, my error bars on when that is likely to happen, my error bars are measured in centuries.
Right.
And again, man, we have things to work on in the here and now for which we want really good tools, not people trying to anticipate everything that could happen and handicap our tools in advance of that. No.
Yeah. I mean, just again, to play the devil's advocate, centuries, that means you're misunderstanding exponential growth.
Yep. I've heard all that.
My intuition's mapped to your intuition. So we'll leave it there.
Okay. Now, Toby,
Yeah.
If next Tuesday the AI overlords appear and enslave us and put us in the matrix, we will not have the last laugh, right?
If we've all become components of some paperclip, we know that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's also the case that the last thing they would ever do is make batteries out of us. We'd be incredibly inefficient batteries. They just grind us up and feed us into some furnace. Like that's a better use of whatever our metabolism is.
A great consolation.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I've got another question here. So the pandemic has revealed issues with the current global supply chain, optimized for the low cost, efficient production of goods, and dependent upon an international shipping infrastructure.
Yep.
There are shortages of personnel, protective equipment, and cotton swabs, and our merchants face inventory challenges.
Yeah.
How can we shift to a more resilient supply chain?
I think this is a great question. I think there are a couple pretty fundamental things going on. One is, should our governments have had a pandemic strategic reserve of things like cotton swabs and masks and gowns and visors and stuff like that? In the same way that we have a strategic petroleum reserve in the United States, we have these set asides. I think I've heard the Chinese have a strategic pork reserve.
Right.
I can't certify that, but I've actually heard that they do, because these are really important things for an economy. And I think the way they work is the government will sell the inventory into the market and replenish it so that it's always got this buffer that's not getting stale.
Right.
Okay. Should we have had a pandemic strategic reserve of lots and lots of PPE and different kinds of treatments and medicines that we thought we'd need? Yes, right. And one of the tragedies, and I don't know about Canada, so I'll speak about America, is how many pretty detailed pandemic playbooks have been generated just in the past couple of administrations that were put in the shredder, as far as I can tell, with the current administration. So should we have been better prepared for exactly that category of equipment for this kind of event? Yes, we should have. The other thing, though, if you're a fan of capitalism like you and I are, one thing that you conclude is that when there is a brand new need, holy cow, will supply chains retool themselves very quickly to meet that need if there aren't really bad impediments in the way. And I think a lot of what has happened to keep the PPA away from us is the fact that if you wanted to sell a thing called a mask, maybe that was categorized as a special kind of device where you needed a lot of upfront permission, and you needed, even in the face of a pandemic, you suddenly confronted a whole lot of hurdles to getting your product to the market.
Right.
Yep. I think a lot of that went on. I'm going to make even more new enemies, I think, during this conversation. I am not a fan of price gouging laws.
Right.
Because what if you are putting your first masks out there for $20 a piece?
Yep.
Okay, I don't think you're a very good person. Yep. But one thing that will happen is all kinds of people will go in there and charge 19, 18, 17, boom, 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 down to almost nothing. You're going to generate supply into that market very, very quickly. It's super counterintuitive, and it's against our moral intuition that you should profiteer off shortages brought up by wars and pandemics. Man, there is no better way to get more supply in the market than to be able to get away with a high price for a short time.
Yeah, it is tricky. I mean, from a practical perspective, a lot of jurisdictions have price gouging laws, of course, and there's thresholds, and I think there's a practical answer, and I think there's an emotional one.
Amen. And sometimes those don't line up.
And they don't. I think,
and on this one, I will go with the practical side, simply because the need is so dire. Like we needed more masks, more swabs, more whatever quicker than we got them. Is it because globally we forgot how to manufacture these things? Right. No. Is it because there weren't planes and ships to take them around the world? No, it was not. I think we gummed up the supply chain in a lot of cases.
Yeah. Let's take the supply chain.
Can I say one more thing on this? Yeah. One of the most interesting wrinkles in this has been toilet paper. Right. Okay. Because what I think happened was toilet paper is a thing that we need. Yeah. And that is kind of hard to substitute for. There aren't really direct substitutes. Yeah. And so the instinct that a lot of people had when they started to hear about lockdowns and they're not going to be spending 8 hours a day at work is, I better go get a couple extra rolls of toilet paper. So a little bit of a hoarding instinct kicked in, and a little bit of a speculator instinct kicked in. And then what we got was this, again, I'll use a little bit of dime store game theory. We got this very unpleasant equilibrium where as soon as a supermarket put toilet paper on the shelves, it vanished because the rational thing for you to do and me to do was grab as much as we possibly could because it might not be there the next time. And so we got in what a game theorist would call this suboptimal equilibrium that made tons of sense for everybody, but it's not what we wanted to have happen. The supermarket didn't want it, you didn't want it, I didn't want it, but there we were. And then we had to work our way out of that unpleasant equilibrium.
And do you think there's a role there, not just for markets, but for regulations? Like,
yeah, but what I think a smart supermarket would do is say limit of 2 rolls per customer.
That's where I was going. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're in a bad equilibrium, you have to find a way to kick yourself into a better one. And we have a couple of well-known tricks and mechanisms for doing that. And markets are important for this. Once that equilibrium improved, then we saw all these great things. I saw photos on Twitter of some speculator with a shopping cart full of toilet paper at Walmart trying to return it.
Right. Returning toilet paper sounds like a very bad joke.
Yeah, and I think there was a Costco or some big discount retailer who turned away people. I think it was in Australia, and they said, "Get lost."
Right.
You were not helping, and now we're not taking our product back because we don't need it. We got plenty now.
Yeah, exactly. Let's take the supply chain conversation up a level of abstraction and, talk about onshoring and offshoring. Well, one of my observations is, this goes back to evolutionary psychology and tribal affiliation. Here's an observation. There's only going to be 2 tribes left. The tribe that affiliates with global and the tribe that affiliates with local. And anywhere's sort of somewheres. And do you see that the COVID-19 will really give some ammunition to the locals who say, let's build a wall, let's build this in America and Canada, this is craziness that we have these lean, just-in-time supply chains. Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's likely. I think we're seeing a bit of that already, and it's part of the same. I'm going to bring guns to a state capitol to protest having to wear a mask.
Right.
Yeah, I do think there is this divide in my country. There's this divide, and you categorize it in all kinds of different ways. Right. One of them that makes sense to me is it's a little bit cosmopolitan versus local. It's a little bit pluralist versus authoritarian. And they don't overlap perfectly on the Venn diagram, but they do overlap. And I think this pandemic is driving those communities farther apart. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that changes. One of the encouraging things, you probably read XKCD, right? Just because of the nonstop awesomeness of that comic. He did this public service where he just listed the degree of public support for different kinds of smart pandemic measures, self-quarantining, wearing a mask, social distancing, stuff like that. They're more popular than, motherhood is in America. They're more popular than Abraham Lincoln. Right? They're just insanely popular. So part of what's going on is a relatively small group of people being florid about their localism and about their displays, and the media picking up on that because it's a compelling story. And we do have politicians who are trying to stoke those divisions. Let's not lose sight of the fact that as far as I can tell, the great majority of people accept the wisdom of these, epidemiology, public health 101 measures.
Yeah, no, great. Okay, last question for you here. Hello and thank you. You mentioned that technological progress doesn't naturally do much to fight pollution. What do you think about the idea of purchasing carbon offsets? What other steps do you think tech companies should be doing?
Hell yes, purchase the carbon offset, right? Because what that does is it provides incentives for people to find new ways to store carbon. They're going to go plant forests that might not have been there anyway. They're going to find ways to make bricks that store a ton of carbon. I don't know. I want that market to expand like crazy. It's a nascent market. It's not very big right now. Yes, go you don't. you don't have to automatically reduce your pollution by your carbon pollution by X% a year, especially because carbon pollution is global. We just want global pollution to go down by X% a year. And if Toby, if I'm going to shake my finger at you because you hop on too many planes, that's like an easy moral dopamine hit for me.
Right.
It's not really solving the problem. Let's just make the pace of carbon increase go down, and let's have that decrease by whatever means are out there. Carbon offsets, I think, are a great means. Now, you have to monitor them. They have to be high quality. There are challenges with doing it, but there are challenges with doing everything that's worthwhile.
Right. Great. Yeah. Couldn't agree more. Ending here, mindful of your time, on a potentially hopeful note. So a two-part question. What do you think is going to get better after COVID-19 for the world? And the second part is, what's going to get better for you, Andy? Like, what do you think is going to get better in your life?
I do think that we are going to reduce the amount of drudgery and busy work out there in the world. Recessions do that.
Yep.
We have new technologies, we have automation, and the amount of mindless drudgery toil, I think, is going to go down. Our challenge is to make sure that the people who are doing that work have a path to something better, to a better kind of job. And I'm optimistic, at least in the short and medium term, that again, once we're out of this recession, that we are not anywhere near peak aggregate labor, peak total labor yet. The Canadian economy, the American economy is not ready to run to grow while needing fewer hours of labor. We're not there yet. And so I hope that the jobs that come out will be higher quality jobs. I hope in places like America where our safety net is really patchwork and our social contract, I think is out of date and unhelpful in some ways.
Yep.
Maybe there's some green shoots. Maybe we can do better on that. That would make me really happy.
You've got some opinions on universal basic income.
Right, my opinions change. I'll fall back on the great. It's actually, I think, a Samuelson quote that we attribute to Keynes all the time. When the facts change, I change my opinions.
Yeah.
Right now, with this massive drop in aggregate demand,
Yeah.
give people money.
Right on.
Give people money. Let them go spend it. Now, again, once we're out of this, do I still want to just be giving people money? I'm still a fan of subsidizing their labor income via a negative income tax. It's the wrinkle that I prefer. But right now, man, we got to stimulate demand. Let's give some people money.
Yeah, cool. Good.
And then for me personally, it goes back to what we were talking about right at the start. This period of quarantining, I'm in a physically pleasant part of the world. I'm here with a family member, and it does kind of tell a chronically busy, overscheduled person, and this feels great.
Yeah.
I'm not sick, thank God, but not going to the airport for weeks and weeks on end, not having to get up at 4 a.m., not having to adjust your sleep schedule, the complete lack of jet lag in my body, I think is something I haven't experienced for probably a decade.
Right.
It feels pretty good. I go for a walk every day out in nature.
Yeah.
Wow. It's crazy how good that feels.
You do a lot of creative work. Are you finding yourself more creative in this time?
It's a hard question to answer, but I think so. And especially because my day's not filled with all these other things, and it's not filled with going to the airport and, taking my shoes off and stuff like that. And when you go for a walk on the beach, it lends itself to kind of big thoughts. Now, the Stern test is still ahead of whether these are actually big thoughts or not, but I'm enjoying most of or a lot of what my brain is churning out these days. And maybe there's a good idea down there.
Cool. Well, listen, I'm really looking forward to this next book. As organizational people, we really need this scrutiny. We need your investigations here. I think it's going to be super useful.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, if I can help, if we can help in any way,
I'm going to come knock on your door.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. So anyway, Andy, always great, always fun to talk to you. I can't wait till we can, have a beer in person.
Yeah, we're gonna hug and have a beer at some point in the future. This I promise you.
You got it, man. All right. Well, listen, stay safe and sane, and look after yourself.
You too. Be well. I hope you and yours stay healthy.
Yeah. Cheers.
Bye, man.
Bye.